It's the most hardcore horror movie of 2024, and it's right up there with Hannibal. The movie is called Grotesquerie 2024. This is an incredibly brutal murder case. The killer tied the wife and children of the roasted man to chairs with both hands and feet, their mouths stuffed with meat taken from the roasted man himself. Before he died, the roasted man was seasoned with salt and pepper by the killer and then put into the oven. 2 hours later, his cheeks were roasted to a crispy golden brown on the outside, tender on the inside, so crispy that when sliced they looked just like cold cuts. His internal organs were also made into side dishes and served on the table. All the family members at the dining table were forced to witness such a barbaric scene with their own eyes. When the family members died, their eyes were still wide open, full of fear. The man was the most pitiful, with only a headless body left slumped on the ground. After the police received a report about this family massacre, a female police officer, Det, rushed to the scene immediately. The sight made Det sick to her stomach. Suddenly, an alarm clock in the room rang. Det then noticed what appeared to be a pot of soup cooking not far away. So she went closer to take a look, only to discover that inside was the youngest member of the family. This was the most brutal case Det had witnessed in her over 10 years on the force. However, what puzzled the police was that the scene had not been cleaned up, yet the perpetrator didn't leave behind any fingerprints or DNA evidence. There was not even a shred of clues or DNA to be found. Det was also very surprised, but only a puddle of thick, black liquid was left behind. The victim's family lived very harmoniously. They didn't have enemies. But clearly, things weren't that simple. The person capable of causing such a massacre, wiping out the entire family, obviously hated them very much. Det thinks the perpetrator's methods are very sophisticated, so she guesses that he may have committed similar crimes before. However, there were no records of similar cases in the police files. The police department's investigation hit a complete dead end. Suddenly, a nun who claimed to be a reporter named Adina came forward. She had come specifically because of this case. Det thought Adina was just chasing clout, and her attitude toward her was very cold. Out of respect for mainstream denominations, Det still received Adina. Adina said she was dedicated to tracking down evil events. She learned about this case through her priest friend and rushed here immediately. Seeing the earnest look in Adina's eyes, Det reluctantly recounted the details of the case. The homeowner and her 2 relatives died of heart failure. Before their deaths, they had experienced a great shock. It wasn't until 3 a.m. that the neighbors called the police because they were kept awake by loud Mozart music coming from the victim's house. But Adina guessed it was the Requiem. Adina's accurate guess made Det feel a sense of danger, and she warily prepared to draw her gun. Adina offered a convincing reason. Adina stated that playing the Requiem was very logical, as it was, after all, Mozart's piece to commemorate the deceased. Det suddenly had a hunch. Things that science couldn't explain might need to be explored with metaphysics. So Det mentioned the strange liquid found at the scene. Based on Det's description and the liquid's smell, Adina guessed it could be the smell of keratin emitted after hair burns. In any case, Adina hadn't seen the actual situation, so they needed to wait for the test results before further analysis. However, what surprised Det was that the killer quickly carried out a second horrific crime. When the police entered the house, they found an old, shiny toilet. It was clear that the homeowner wasn't a decent person either before they died. It wasn't until the curtains were drawn back that the police could see what was nailed to the wall. Among the victims, one was barely intact. The 2 beside them had their lower bodies severed. Despite such a brutal killing method, not a single drop of blood was left at the scene, as if the victim's blood had been completely drained. The police discovered a clear message on the wall: "I am the abandoned one." At that time, no one could discern the killer's motive. The only thing left at the crime scene was a pool of black liquid. This time, Adina came along with the police. Arriving at the scene, the other officers were still confused about what was happening when they noticed Det taking Adina away, only to quickly return to the scene. It turned out that Det believed Adina could be of some help, so she warned the officers not to touch the scene. She decided to bring Adina along for the investigation. However, what Det didn't expect was that she was being followed by a mysterious person. Tonight, as soon as she got home, Det suddenly heard strange noises around her. Because of this, the police officer drew her gun. She followed the sound to the kitchen and discovered the radio was playing the Requiem. Clearly, the person who came was not there to make peace. Det immediately pulled up the window blinds and saw a figure moving not far away, so she immediately gave chase. Because the distance was too great, Det emptied her clip but still didn't hit the person. Her daughter, awakened by the noise, thought her mother was drunk, completely unaware that she had just narrowly escaped death. Edina came to find Det again to discuss the case, just as the analysis report on the black liquid came in. Edina recognized it as high-concentration sulfur dioxide and immediately excitedly flipped open the Book of Revelation. What is it? In the Bible, this is a substance in acid rain. This is the curse in the Bible. This is the pungent smell you described earlier. The breath of Jehovah is like a stream of sulfur, setting fire. A third of mankind was killed by these three plagues. That is, being killed by the fire from their mouths, the smoke, and the sulfur. The Book of Revelation, the darkest book of comfort. Great, a religious pervert. Since no DNA traces of the perpetrator were left at the scene, with no other options, Det personally went to the convent to visit Edina. Afterward, Edina led her to her deduction room. From a religious perspective, she reinterpreted the perpetrator's psychology for detective. I'm sure you've been looking in the wrong direction. It's not a crime of acquaintance. They may have been stalked, but were unaware they had been chosen. Our killer has transcended beyond earthly life, so it won't be a student or a professor. How do you know? My intuition. But you are ignoring your intuition. You don't see the grandeur of all this. This is the blatant call of the apocalypse. These murder scenes are rich in symbolism. This killer is preaching warning, telling a parable, and evangelizing. Do you see these things? It seems to be saying that it has descended. It has finally arrived. Tremble and praise me for my magnificence. He sees himself as God, but Det still clung to the old-fashioned police way of thinking. She assumed that with her experience of solving 400 cases, she could catch the killer, ultimately being judged by Edina as having outdated thinking. Now, only the handsome priest can share in Edina's bizarre thoughts. The priest is very curious about the case Edina describes. This is curiosity, citing even a classic example. To make my point, the first cable theft break-in, they cooked my father and ate him. Jesus, the incarnation of God the Father, said, "Eat my flesh and drink my blood." The flesh of God the Father. Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, the Last Supper, crucified, and then they even sucked all the blood out of the corpse. This is a quote from Leviticus. It is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. They sucked out all their blood to try to take away their souls. Exactly. Edina felt she had met a kindred spirit, and she openly shared her discoveries without hiding anything. Little did she know that the pastor sitting opposite her was a pervert. When no one was around, he would whip his own body, muttering under his breath as if performing some kind of ritual. Afterward, the pastor would submerge his nose and mouth in water. After talking to the priest, Edina discovered a new perspective. She suspected the case was related to a satanic cult, but right then, Det interrupted Edina's wild speculations. At this point, the police had used the bloodstains on the sidewalk to identify a suspect. The guy's name was Sullivan, a criminal who specialized in harvesting human organs for sale on the black market. He had a history of kidnapping children in war zones to supply his gruesome trade. After being exposed, he was sentenced to 21 years, but he'd been out for 9 months now. So, Det suspected Sullivan might be planning to get back into the game, and he immediately led an armed squad to raid Sullivan's house. However, after the police searched everywhere, they were met with a scene in the basement that made them sick to their stomachs, vomiting uncontrollably. Det slowly walked down and found Sullivan's obese body lying helplessly on the ground, and above him was his mother's. As Det got closer, he saw that Sullivan's mother was still alive. As the police carried her away, she kept shouting verses from the Bible. Det now realized the killer intentionally left Sullivan's blood at the scene, just so the police would follow the trail and go admire his next masterpiece. Det carefully discovered that this time the killer had even left a piece of paper. He had written his name on it. What was his name? Grotesquerie. I am the sane one who stirs up this world, and added, "May all your dreams come true." I don't get this. Any other evidence? None. After Det recounts the whole story, Edina suggests that they should search for the murder from a philosophical perspective. Edina speculates that the perpetrator is very likely someone among the clergy, maybe not an Orthodox Catholic believer, but some kind from a bizarre sect. After all, these heretics do exist. They're into controlling minds with drugs. After Det got home on a rainy night, he handed the box found at the crime scene to his daughter, who's good at puzzles, but her daughter couldn't open it, no matter how long she studied it. Det slowly drifted off to sleep while waiting, but suddenly, the sound of footsteps around her woke her up. Det immediately grabbed her gun and patrolled the house. She ran to her daughter's room first, but she didn't notice a shadowy figure flash past the window behind her. After making sure her daughter was safe, she felt relieved. Suddenly, she got a call from the police station. Apparently, the killer had committed a fourth murder. When Det arrived at the scene, she and her colleagues were all shocked by what they saw. It wasn't until Edina arrived that Det finally snapped out of it. The killer recreated the Last Supper, murdering 12 homeless people and arranging them in horrifyingly artistic poses. Det discovered that the person playing Jesus was the same man she had given money to yesterday. She never expected to meet him again under these circumstances. She was completely stunned. Det's mind was severely shaken. She decided to go out for a drink to try to ease her fear. 3 consecutive murders remain unsolved. The killer struck again, committing a fourth murder. He stitched together various female body parts into one corpse. In the head position, he even hung a bizarre goat's head. Det observed closely and was shocked to discover that these body parts came from the sex workers she had helped before. The distinctive tattoos and scars on their bodies all held special meaning, so she could recognize their identities immediately. This method of crime reminds me of today's dinner, turducken. This is a very complicated dish that requires chopping up duck meat and then sewing it with a needle and thread into the cavity of a turkey before cooking. Det immediately realized that the killer this time was provoking her. Because Det had had a few drinks in the evening, she was still not sober, and others could smell the alcohol on her from far away. Therefore, investigator Jack suggested that Det go rest and wait for the forensic pathologist's autopsy report. But Det became extremely angry because of that. She had accurately identified the information of the owner of a tattoo or scar through the characteristics of each piece of skin. Dory was a member of the beachside hotel group. That guy was violent with her. She was terrified, so she came to the police station. Where did you take that damn report? What did you do, Jack? Did you lock her up? She came to you for help. The other person says, how do you know it was Dory? Det says, because of the tattoo on her ankle. A cherry blossom is a symbol of fleeting and ephemeral beauty. Ironically, it's her leg. Danny Carter. I used to wander around looking for drugs between 7th Street and Camino. I've given that boy naloxone countless times. Tell me how he got the scar on his chest. He had heart surgery when he was just 6 months old. You don't know anything about this community. You'd rather wait 3 days for DNA test results. Thanks for that. Marking them all as sleeping it off and tossing them into a mass grave with a tombstone because they're not worth a dime to you. Is that your love for the community? Do you have all those names written down already? The other person says, yes, ma'am. Det says, I want to know who each of them spoke to in the last 2 weeks. I want all the photos. I expect him to mark them carefully, bag it, and put it on my desk. On my desk in 1 hour, you hear me? The monster is out there. After the night he had, he's moving slowly now, so we can catch him. Let's go. Be proactive, people. Det's compassion awakened everyone, silencing the insubordinate Jack. The next day, she arrived at the police station, bringing Edina along to discuss the 4th case committed by the killer. Det discovered a common thread. Many of the victims were the most well-known sex workers in town. The perpetrator was disgusted by sexual acts. Edina believed that these 4 murders were treated by the killer as 4 essays he composed on the victims' bodies, painting his language. Therefore, Edina decided that deciphering the meaning the killer wanted to express was the key to solving the case, a detail that other police officers had not discovered. Based on the stitching technique on the 3rd body, Det deduced that the killer might be someone with a certain level of surgical skill, a surgeon, or a medical examiner. Most importantly, the killer had a certain understanding of Det because there was a new development in the case. After reorganizing the files, Edina contacted her confidant priest to discuss the latest case details. At this time, The priest was wearing revealing clothes and dancing in the church. He suddenly took an interest in Edina and asked her to personally bring the files so he could talk to her himself. Edina went to the priest's room again, but found him only wrapped in a robe, coupled with his strong physique and handsome face. For a moment, Edina was stunned. She was unaware that the priest had worn her out. She wanted to get close to him to be intimate, but at the crucial moment, she was called to stop. After Edina ran out of the room, she lost control of her emotions for a moment. Meanwhile, Det went to her husband's bedside, but found the nurse helping him clean his bed sores. The bloody scene made Det almost throw up all the alcohol she had just drunk. She also realized that her husband's bodily functions were rapidly declining. The nurse took the opportunity to remind Det to abandon her insistence on keeping her husband alive, to unplug his ventilator, but Det refused to do so. She was upset and escaped, drinking the hard liquor she carried with her. Eddie's caregiver walked by, secretly lighting a cigarette for Det, knowing that she was about to drive away. Eddie kindly reminded Det that driving could lead to an accident. Det remained stubborn, insisting on driving herself. Not long after, the two met again. Det had gotten into a car accident because of drunk driving. When she woke up again, she was handcuffed to the hospital bed. Her colleagues had used their connections to help Det avoid jail time, but the other party wasn't planning on releasing Det anytime soon. After her colleagues left, Det had to beg Eddie to help her escape from the hospital. Luckily, Eddie softened and agreed. Eddie, following Det's instructions, took the key from her pocket. After uncuffing Det, he led her to disguise herself and escape from the hospital. Det returned home and was surprised to find that her young daughter, May, had decoded the mysterious box that Det brought back from the crime scene. Inside was a piece of paper with coordinates. She decides to go to that location to investigate, therefore enlisting Eddie, her most recent lover, to come to her house and watch her daughter for a day. Then Det drove, taking Edina to the designated location. After driving all day, Det gradually entered an area filled with thick smoke. The deeper they went, the higher the temperature rose. After arriving at the designated location, they discovered that the coordinates pointed to a large crater. Is he trying to tell us something? Yes, who has laid me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Suddenly, a man ran over, but the two women wouldn't let him approach. Det raised her gun, aiming at the newcomer, full of caution. The man wasn't angry, and after a moment, he told the two that he was a geological survey employee, John. He reminded them that they were standing on a fault line. At this moment, the fire pit in front of them was a sinkhole above a natural gas reservoir. This hole was expanding every day, and it couldn't even be explained by science. Even John couldn't help but complain that this really looked like the gate to hell. So Det and Edina had no choice but to retreat. However, on the way back, the two encountered firefighters putting out burning cars. With no other choice, Det had to find a place to stay. When she tried to find a motel, she was told by locals that it was not a suitable place to stay. Do you know of any way to avoid the fire? It's too late. Do you think we should turn back? Oh, absolutely not. Upon leaving, Det got a fire-resistant blanket and she immediately decided to drive away. However, as the car was moving, Det spotted a woman in front, desperately running toward her car. Det slowed down and picked up the woman. After the woman scrambled into the car, she screamed that he was coming and gave orders. Det, still not having time to react, turned the car around and fled the scene, following the other person's directions to a roadside motel. Upon arrival, the woman quickly got out of the car and ran straight into the public restroom. Det decided to stop here, so she took her suitcase and prepared to check in, but noticed that the motel owner, despite heavy makeup, couldn't hide the bruises on her face. The observant Det noticed that and proactively asked if the other person needed help, but she was flatly refused by the other person. Edina, a little uneasy about that woman, went to the women's restroom to search, but found blood-stained paper everywhere. The woman had vanished without a trace. Edina and Det discovered a trail of bloody footprints on the ground. They followed the footprints and found that the woman had run far away. Det had completely lost her patience. She decided to go to her room to rest first. After putting down her luggage, Edina felt even more uneasy. She wanted to go outside to get some fresh air. Det received a call from her superior and stayed in the room to answer it. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed on the highway. Edina looked up and saw that two cars had collided. She rushed over, taking charge of comforting the child in one of the cars, but discovered that the motel owner's boyfriend was frantically pushing her head down into the purple swimming pool. Seeing this, Edina immediately let go and tried to approach the two. The owner's boyfriend realized he had been discovered and stopped his violent act. Edina just felt that this world was too crazy. She hurriedly ran to get help from Det and tell her about the insane behavior outside. But Det was very worried because the signal was interrupted. She was in a panic. Det asked the hotel owner for help, wanting to contact headquarters using the landline, but no matter how she tried, she couldn't get through. Suddenly, Det heard gunshots. She immediately went back to her room and grabbed the gun she always carried with her. While loading the gun, Det and Edina suddenly heard the hotel owner's terrified screams. The two opened the door to investigate and discovered that it was the motel owner's boyfriend pointing a gun at the blood-covered woman. The owner was trying to stop him when the car that had crashed pulled up. Nick then frantically fired at the helpless woman. Suddenly, a man stepped out of the car, risking his life in the hail of bullets, preparing to take the bloodied woman away. Seeing this, Edina completely lost her composure and, without hesitation, tried to intervene, but because of this, she was unfortunately shot. Everything happened so suddenly that Det didn't have time to react either. Luckily, the police department, because of the sudden signal interruption, sensed something was wrong and sent a car to pick up the two. Thanks to timely medical intervention, Edina's life was saved. However, the priest and police colleagues were extremely disappointed in Det. They believed Det was too selfish to put the innocent Edina in harm's way. Because of this, Det felt extremely guilty. She also realized that this was aimed at her. While chatting with her colleague, Det suddenly learned that some of the criminals she had arrested had been released, especially Diverlin, her nemesis. Coincidentally, Diverlin's release time, the time of the first murder, and this case were very closely aligned. She believed that all of this could be revenge. Very soon after, the serial killer struck again. The crime scene was so brutal that it made the forensic examiners vomit constantly. When Det entered, she discovered that the abdomens of two women had been cut open with surgical instruments and stretched to the maximum extent. The perpetrator had brutally disemboweled the victims. Ultimately, the women died from excessive blood loss. Because the details of the case were becoming increasingly serious, the police still hadn't found the perpetrator. Therefore, the Federal Bureau of Investigation decided to take over the case. Det was also facing the risk of being removed from her position, but she was extremely unwilling to accept this. Just because the perpetrator's time of the crime and the time Det escaped from the hospital coincided, Det believed that the perpetrator only wanted to provoke her, so she became even more determined to investigate the other party's background clearly. Det went to the victim's house and discovered that she had 3 other children. The children looked terrified. Det learned from the children's accounts that, before she died, their mother had gone out with a man she knew. The other children didn't know anything more. Det had to comfort them and then drove nearby to investigate, only to discover a car stopped in the middle of the road with a pool of blood on the driver's seat. After Det investigated the surroundings, she discovered a frantic woman, holding a blood-covered child, trembling in an orange grove, not knowing what to do. Det tried to approach the woman as gently as possible, took the fragile child from her arms, and prepared to take the woman to the hospital for emergency treatment. Det brought the woman and child to the hospital. Doctors examined the woman but discovered that she was not the mother, and the woman was too old to be capable of giving birth. Even the blood on her body wasn't hers. Clearly, the child wasn't hers. Det felt extremely strange. She noticed that the woman had regained consciousness and proactively went to talk to her. By this time, the woman had calmed down. She proactively told Det her name was Marcy and then anxiously asked about the child's whereabouts. Through DNA comparison, Det confirmed that the child Marcy was holding wasn't related to the murder victim. She then patiently asked Marcy again if she remembered where she was born, but Marcy couldn't answer because she was worried. Afterward, she changed the subject, constantly repeating the 3 words golden ratio. Det couldn't help but ask why. Have you ever wondered why you met me today? Maybe it's fate. Maybe it's something that had to happen. Maybe this is a sign, a miracle. Det suddenly realized that the woman in front of her, Marcy, clearly had a mental illness. So, She stopped engaging with her and decisively took Marcy to a psychiatric hospital. Later, Det found out from a colleague that Marcy was a human trafficker. Det had a feeling that Marcy might be connected to Diverlin. To clear things up, Det went to see Diverlin, who invited her into his house to talk. Meanwhile, his guys spotted a bunch of people with weapons nearby. He carefully pulled out his gun, just in case, and told Diverlin about the possible ambush, who also started to be on alert. When the first gunshot rang out, Det immediately restrained Diverlin, who was right in front of her, and pulled a gun out of his briefcase. Even under Det's threat, Diverlin kept talking. You're being played, deceived by a false prophet. He thinks we're on the brink of the apocalypse. War, conflict between nations. He wants to use you like an innocent lamb. The death of a good woman will shock everyone. It'll wake people up from their slumber. Yes, it's happening everywhere, the slaughter between good and evil. So, people will seek salvation before the final chapter, okay? How did you know? Why did you think I knew Marcy? Does Marcy know him? She's one of his followers. From this, Det got a crucial piece of information. Marcy did know the killer. That night, weighed down with worries, Det got a strange phone call. The person on the other end just kept breathing heavily. Det guessed it might be the killer calling, so she gave him a piece of her mind and hung up. Det just felt incredibly frustrated. Suddenly, she noticed a flash of light outside her window. Det immediately grabbed her gun and chased after it, only to find her husband's private nurse paying her a visit. The nurse brought over some alcohol, wanting to smooth things over between them. Det had no choice but to politely invite her in, but then she had to listen to the nurse gush about how she was obsessed with her husband's achievements. Det patiently listened to the nurse's story, then directly pointed her gun at the shameless nurse's face and kicked her out of the house. After that, Det finds Marcy and decides to ask for the killer's information, but unexpectedly, she refuses to reveal anything. She only told Det the location where she had hidden the kidnapped children. When the police arrived at the location provided by Marcy and reached the building, they were shocked by the scene in front of them. Pregnant women, like animals, were tied to racks. On their chests were milking devices responsible for collecting their milk, and through tubes, it was slowly fed into the mouths of babies who unconsciously suckled on bottles, receiving their necessary daily food. While rescuing the women, Det was drawn by a singing voice to a hidden place. She entered and found the walls covered with candid photos of herself. Suddenly, a man with a knife appeared from behind and grabbed Detective, but she was already on guard and quickly created distance between them, shooting him down with her gun. Afterward, Det took off the man's mask. Seeing his face, Det was utterly horrified. Det fell apart when she discovered that the man she had just been dating, Eddie, was actually with her daughter right now. She felt like her whole world was completely falling apart. Before losing it completely, Det downed a glass of liquor and angrily left the scene. She drove to the hospital and decided to let her vegetative husband go. The nurses were reluctant, but in the end, they had to accept Det's decision. While the doctor was performing euthanasia on her husband, Det stood beside him, reading the Bible and praying for his soul. As her husband's oxygen was removed, Det calmly tossed the Bible onto him. She no longer had any lingering attachment. Det turned and walked out of the hospital, completely cold. She went home and finally got a good night's sleep. The next day, Det made a crucial discovery. She found at the pastor's house traces left by the serial killer. It was clear that in the previous episode, he had attacked Det, but the pastor ended up being the one killed. A notebook on the table contained even more details, every detail of the killings, which terrified Det as she read it. Suddenly, she noticed a strange piece of paper tucked inside the diary. It turned out to be from her husband, a certificate recommending that he undergo euthanasia. With the closing of the case, the serial killings came to an end and Det was hailed as a hero. While everyone was congratulating her, Det's boss called her into his office and informed her of her termination, promising a generous severance package along with an annual pension of $146,000. But Det still felt she had what it took to stay at the police department. She rejected the offer without hesitation, not knowing that she had just rejected her chance to live. The news report about Adina's follow-up interview also ended. The report received a great response and attracted many followers, so she intentionally sought out Det to celebrate with drinks. But Det didn't want to keep up the pretense anymore. She saw through Adina's lies. Every time a case happened, Adina was able to arrive at the scene promptly, even arriving first. Because all along, she was the priest's accomplice. Adina was always involved. After Det saw through Adina's lies, the other woman completely dropped the act too and wildly swung a knife at Detective. Today, between the two of them, it was either one or the other who would die. Det was unarmed and initially no match for Adina, but luckily she had many years of combat experience. For a while, Adina couldn't gain the upper hand either. Det tried to grab the gun in her bag, but unexpectedly, the ever-alert Adina quickly knocked the bag out of her hand, and the gun fell to the other side of the table. Det tried to create some distance by knocking over a glass, but Adina, like she was possessed, charged in for the attack. Even with a pot of boiling soup dumped on her head, Adina still lunged forward and plunged the knife into Det's waist. By now, both were injured, but Adina reacted faster and pinned Det to the ground, pulled out the knife, and stabbed her wildly. Suddenly, the scene shifted. Det's husband, Marshall, who was supposed to be dead, was now facing his daughter, wanting to break up with her husband. Marshall, whose principle was to encourage reconciliation rather than breakups, was shocked to hear the heartbreaking truth the next second. His son-in-law was having an affair with his wife, Detective. In the end, all the words Marshall wanted to say turned into a heavy sigh. Since his daughter had made her choice, Marshall decided to respect it. Afterward, he went to the hospital with a heavy heart. Det was now completely paralyzed, even though doctors repeatedly advised Marshall to consider euthanasia for his wife. Marshall, due to a deep-seated obsession, hesitated and refused to let go. He prayed that Det might wake up. So, every day he took meticulous care of his wife, attending to her every need. Ever since Marshall found out that heartbreaking truth from his daughter, he felt he should also let go. Therefore, Marshall went to the doctor and decided to discontinue further treatment. The doctor said it could be done tomorrow. Marshall finally breathed a sigh of relief. He then went to his mistress to recount Det's and his daughter's crazy behavior. His mistress was in the middle of a live stream, and she subtly helped Marshall complain about Det's insanity before he rushed off. It's not hard to realize that this seductive and sensual mistress is, surprisingly, the nurse in Det's world. But what's even more shocking is that Megan, who is Adina, colluded with the priest and is now Det's boss. Because she's such a perfectionist at work, she often gives Det a hard time, so the two of them don't like each other. But Megan knows about Detective. After hearing that Det will be given a gentle death, she still decides to visit her last night. At this point, in Det's mind, the most evil priest has become her attending physician. When Megan arrives, Marshall kicks her out. Just because Det... The thing I've always hated the most is when a superior gives my wife a hard time. On this side, the son-in-law comes to bother them again, and Marshall feels like his head is about to explode. He accidentally slams the door of the hospital room shut, isolating the two outside. Then, despite his daughter's objections, he immediately asks the doctors to proceed with euthanasia for Detective Marshall, his pride wounded, takes out all his anger on Detective. While the drugs are slowly being administered into her body, Det is completely unaware, still in her world and fighting with Megan in an earth-shattering battle. Finally, Megan, who has the upper hand, raises her gun and points it directly at Det's head. At the same time, Det's oxygen tank is removed. Her heart has stopped beating. She suddenly feels like she's floating in midair, like an outsider, observing the final battle between Adina and herself. With her last bit of strength, Det pulls Adina down to the ground. As fresh blood gushes from the back of Adina's neck. In the hospital room, Det's heart suddenly starts beating again. She only feels her body falling rapidly. At the same time, Det, who is confronting Adina, raises her gun and blows Adina's head off. After a gunshot, Det on the hospital bed suddenly opens her eyes, completely returning to the real world. After Det wakes up, it becomes a medical miracle, being revived after her heart stopped. Because of this, Dr. Tom is very interested in studying her, even intentionally seeking out Det's daughter, May, to try to discuss the treatment process. To be more precise, Det was in a coma, and the things that happen in the dream world all have traces in the real world. Tom mentioned something very interesting. Det once dreamed that little May was so overweight that she wanted to take advantage of her size to participate in a show called Half Ton of Hurt. The words half a ton struck a nerve with May. She says she hates TV shows and has never liked watching them. Meanwhile, Det has woken up and is receiving care and undergoing rehabilitation training. Because her legs still won't listen, her patience is gradually wearing thin. At this moment, Dr. Jill enters and Det immediately becomes angry. According to her, Jill is still that body-worshipping killer. Det uncomfortably approaches her hospital bed, but suddenly, a scene appears before her eyes. Herself lying on the bed, dying, with her daughter May still by her side, cheering her on. At that moment, she only felt dizzy and lightheaded. Meanwhile, Det's husband, Marshall, is with his lover, Selena, discussing plans to divorce Detective. He is now completely determined and will have a lawyer draft a divorce agreement and end his relationship with Detective. Selena is overjoyed to hear this. She also looks forward to officially living with the person she loves. At this moment, Megan is being questioned by Tom. She recalls every moment with Det before Det fell into a coma. During her retirement celebration, the two of them were making purple grape juice together. Det was hesitant about retiring, while Megan strongly opposed her staying, and the two of them argued fiercely because of this, with the doctor taking notes on every word. After Megan finished the questioning, she returned home. Even though she's a police officer, at home she's always controlled by her boyfriend Justin. When he hits her, Megan doesn't dare to fight back. This time she can't take it anymore and pulls out her gun. Justin, however, isn't fazed. He's very sure that Megan doesn't have the guts to shoot. Not long after, Megan doesn't shoot. She resentfully drives away from home to the beach to relax. As night falls, Megan can only live temporarily in a hotel. After consulting with Det and Megan, Tom decides to conduct psychological treatment again for Detective Det, who was in a coma for 6 months. Even after waking up, still has difficulty adapting to the real world. Doctors monitored her with an electroencephalogram and found no abnormalities. Det always feels that some memories of the dream are gradually fading, and even has an intuition that she is still immersed in a coma. Seeing this, Tom communicates with her about the connection between dreams and reality. In reality, May is a bright and radiant college lecturer, but in Det's dream, she is worried about her daughter's overweight figure, filled with anger. That's why there was a story of May wanting to participate in a program for obese people. Then Det talked about Marshall being bedridden in the dream. The doctor believes that this is due to Det's lack of control in her marriage in reality. So in the dream, she created a wife who could decide the life and death of her vegetative husband. After that, the two discuss Megan, who has a strongly contrasting personality. Through the conversation, the doctor discovered that Megan is an extremely selfish person, which Det finds disgusting. Therefore, Det, who is not religious, turns Megan into the image of an eccentric nun. But Det still felt frustrated about the image of the drunkard in the dream. Seeing this, Tom patiently guides her. Det is just adding emotions from reality and the dream, and then proceeding to recreate them. Only then did Det feel a little sense of belonging to the present. After a period of rehabilitation, she was finally discharged from the hospital. What surprised Det was that Megan came to pick her up. The two are incompatible. After only a short walk, they start arguing. After leaving, Det notices that Megan seems to have bruises on her body. Although the two don't get along, Det still uses her way to remind Megan to quickly escape her current situation with Justin. In my dream, I clearly remember you had bruises on your body just like now, whether it's subconscious or reality. Let me make one thing clear. Honey, you've been possessed. Struggle to break free while you still can. After Det returned home, her nanny, Marcy, was already waiting for her. Seeing that Det had returned to normal, she felt very relieved. Next, Marcy stayed by Det's side to continue the rehabilitation program. Finally, Det could face her doctor, Jill. She believes that dreams also reflect reality. So Det is convinced that her animosity towards Jill is because he did something and was overheard by Det while she was in a coma. Jill's eyes were full of astonishment. After leaving the hospital, Det went to see her daughter, May. May still couldn't get over the fact that Det had an affair with her husband. Still upset, the daughter angrily slapped her mother across the face and lectured her about knowing her place and having some shame. Det, seeing her daughter's refusal to accept her, can't hold back her tears. She sits slumped in the car for a while, not knowing where to go. Luckily, she still has Marcy for company. Let's go get a grass smoothie together. Det calmly goes to the house of her husband and his mistress and personally delivers the divorce papers. She decides to finally leave each other with some dignity. However, Marshall is equally angry with Det. He uses harsh, offensive language, berating Det's adulterous behavior. Det fully accepts it. After all, it was her fault. The next day, when she meets Det again, her younger daughter May is finally much more clear-headed. Det tells May about how her husband is a terrible man. Even after hearing it, May is still very upset about her mother's actions, making Det feel utterly helpless. In the end, she gives up and tells her daughter about her plans to move away. Seeing that May does not react, Det also doesn't want to cling to their mother-daughter relationship anymore and slaps May across the face. Det goes to see Tom again for psychological counseling. She imagines her late father as a stranger giving her directions during a difficult time. At this point, Det can't hold back her tears. After listening, Tom introduces Det to a veteran psychology doctor, Milton, who will be responsible for helping Det analyze the dream related to the criminal case. After Milton enters the room, Det is shocked by his appearance, feeling extremely astonished because he is paralyzed. Only his fingers can move, so he can only control the computer and chat with Detective Milton. Asks Det if she has ever encountered a similar case in real life. After recalling, Det remembers the dairy farm incident, where women were tied to milking machines like dairy cows, providing food for the children. From Det's point of view, her subconscious probably believes that women have lost their power, being treated as a production tool. This dream also causes her great distress, and in reality, Det and Marcy together attend a feminist movement meeting at the town hall. However, when it comes to other cases, Det is somewhat resistant to further discussion. Milton believes that only by understanding the things that Det fears can she heal her psychological wounds. When he notices Det's inner turmoil, Milton unexpectedly mentions a seminar on the topic of whether compassion is gradually disappearing in society. The speaker calls this behavior the degeneration of humankind. Tom believes that the horrific cases in Det's dream are related to each other. He then proactively ends the psychological consultation. After Det returns home, she discovers that Selena is visiting. Det's attitude towards a third party is very hard to grasp. Selena, who in the dream was madly infatuated with Marshall, is now planning to leave him. But Det regretfully says that she is not responsible for after-sales service. Selena also admires Det's free spirit. She can freely go wherever she wants. Before leaving, Selena and Det shake hands and make peace, but Det just feels unprecedented exhaustion. She is just about to go to bed to rest for a bit when she receives a phone call from Megan, who has arrived at a crime scene. Det is horrified to discover that her dream has become reality again. The scene from the beginning of the movie appears once more before Det's eyes, but luckily it's just a dream. Det wakes up to the sound of the phone ringing but discovers that it's a call from Megan. She is tired and wants to hang up, but unexpectedly Megan suddenly begs Det to come to the hotel to find her. When Megan takes out the vial containing the black liquid, Det's expression immediately changes. She thinks that someone has invaded her dreams and started to imitate. What? I don't understand. They took advantage of her coma dream, killing the whole family most horribly. That's right. I saw this as a case I'm investigating. Did I drag this into reality? Did I bring this monster back? Det just feels utterly devastated. She suddenly pulls out a knife, signaling Megan to attack her. Only blood can make Det feel at ease. After Megan follows suit with a complicated expression, Det calms down. She goes to the bathroom to deal with the wound. Megan's boyfriend, Justin, finally finds a hotel. He is very angry that Megan ran away. This time, Megan is determined not to give in. Justin feels his authority is being challenged, so he hits Megan again. Hearing the noise outside, Det immediately pulls out her gun. She sees the hot-tempered man who shot at Dina in the dream. Her mind completely collapses, but Justin mistakes Det's hesitation at this moment for fear from the bottom of her own heart. So Justin directly puts his mouth on the gun's muzzle to provoke Detective. But he underestimated the other party's madness. Det, who was already hesitating between reality and dream, finally made up her mind. She didn't hesitate to shoot towards Justin. That scumbag was shot dead on the spot. Megan was also stunned by the scene. Det just feels that this world is completely insane. She just got home when she discovered that her husband and his mistress arrived uninvited. Det impatiently asked the purpose of Marshall's visit, but Marshall smugly suggests that the three of them live happily together. The mistress, Selena, even says that she is willing to take care of the whole family's daily life. Det unhesitatingly rejects Marshall and kicks the two out of the house. On the way back, Selena doesn't hide the fact that she came here just to watch the drama. She then frankly expresses her boredom with this poor desert town. Marshall quietly listens to Selena vent. Before getting out of the car, he still profoundly expresses his feelings. In reality, Marshall is not as ethical and respectable as he appears. He longs for an ancient Roman Empire without order and promotes the view of living for oneself, until Megan, along with the police, enters the classroom. Marshall restrains himself a little. Waiting until after class, Megan accuses Marshall of raping a female student. Marshall is a little surprised. He hurriedly opens his phone, taking out the message history to prove that it was just a normal romantic relationship that developed from there. Even so, Megan will not be lenient with him. Marshall was quickly released. However, this experience made him feel humiliated, so he directly chose to end his life with pills. Fortunately, Selena brought him to the hospital in time. Marshall's life was not in great danger. When he wakes up, Selena directly proposes to break up, then turns and leaves. After receiving the news, May rushes over. At this moment, she has completely cut ties with her mother. She can't bear the thought of losing her father. May tells her father to live well, and then also hurriedly leaves. When Marshall is discharged from the hospital, the person who comes to pick him up is none other than Eddie, his son-in-law. Marshall is somewhat reluctant because this is a man who once had an affair with his wife, but when Eddie offers to take him to meet a group of pure men, Marshall finds it hard to refuse. Arriving at the place, Marshall meets an all-male group led by Dr. Milton. Following Dr. Milton's introduction, Marshall gives an emotional speech. He can't contain his indignation, defending men. Marshall believes that men's rights are gradually being taken away by women, so he desperately wants to solve this problem. In the end, Marshall decides to use the form of crime to put principles back on the right track. After Marshall finishes his speech, the hall erupts in continuous and enthusiastic applause. At this time, a confused Det finds Dr. Tom and continues to express her confusion. She thinks that maybe she is already dead. Then, Det raises a few points of suspicion. Tom was treated by raping women while they were in a coma and forcing them to become pregnant. When Det makes this accusation, the doctor mocks her contemptuously. She is living in a self-made prison. Det increasingly feels that this world is a prison designed specifically for her. Then, Det also mentions that she shot and killed Megan's boyfriend, Justin. However, when she returns to the hotel room, she discovers that it has been cleaned up and Megan no longer mentions it either. Unwilling to give up, Det followed and investigated Megan and discovered that Megan had contacted a cleaning crew to dispose of the body to cover up her crime. At this point, the authority of the law is challenged. Det can't help but rush to the police station, reporting Megan's actions but being denied. Det increasingly suspects that this is a tactic that the devil uses to torment her. She believes that this world is like a jigsaw puzzle, each piece creating a dream for itself. While Dr. Tom listens, he repeatedly emphasizes that Det is still alive. According to Dr. Tom, Det's case is too special. He believes that the reason Det has so many bizarre dreams is all influenced by the cases she has handled. But Det relentlessly argues with the doctor about whether she is awake or not, relentlessly. Finally, she tiredly returns to her hospital room. After an unknown amount of time, Megan suddenly bursts into the hospital room, lying face down on Det's lap and crying. After Megan calms down, she admits that after Justin was shot dead, she found someone to dispose of the body. However, the purpose of Megan's visit is a difficult case. She thinks that only Det can solve it. Finally, Det is moved. She arrives at the crime scene and once again witnesses the perpetrator staging the scene, a murder imitating the famous painting The Last Supper. Finally, what horrifies Det is that this time the image of Jesus has been added, and it is her doctor, who is also the person who most resembles Jesus in her dream. After regaining her composure, Det says that in 1 hour she will solve the case. Then, she calmly goes to the corner where, in the dream, the perpetrator attacked her, waiting for the perpetrator to fall into the trap.